All right.
Right.
Hello, we have a very special guest with us today, Mansi Kasliwal, who is joining us from Bangalore. Mansi works with Byju's, and I'm going to let her share a little bit more about her background herself. Mansi, thank you so much for doing this. Your insights are going to be incredibly helpful in helping us shape the narrative for the future of work. So, thank you so much for sparing your time and doing this for us. And welcome.
Thank you, Vibha. It's a pleasure to talk to you. Actually, this is one of my favorite subjects to discuss where we are going and, what are those skills and what are sort of the ammunition in the artillery that's needed by younger folks to be prepared for their own future, the country's growth and all of that. So I think a lot of the work that I've done in the past has somehow led me to still have that question in my mind as to where is that we are going with all of this. So I'd love to share my thoughts on that.
Okay, terrific. So let's try to find the answer to that question together.
Yeah.
So as we start out, if you could just talk a little bit about your early years, your educational background, just
Sure.
walk us through a little bit of context.
Right. So I'll start with, I studied to be an architect. I think in grade 10, I was very, very sure that I wanted to be an architect. And it may sound really silly now, but I'd read The Fountainhead at that time, and I was extremely sort of enamored by Howard Roark. And I said, this is the best thing to be. And also, I think as a student, I was always interested in science and the arts. So this architecture seemed like a good mix of the two, where there's creativity, but there's also so I thought this would be a great career path for me. So I started to be an architect. I did a bachelor's course in architecture from the University of Pune. Somewhere during that time, I got very interested in sustainability and sort of energy efficient design. And also, I grew up in Jaipur, which is a city very rich in architecture and rich in actually vernacular architecture, which is climate responsive. In the desert heat, we still didn't have ACs and things like that. So I think a lot of that influenced my wanting to delve deeper into what are some of those ways in which modern buildings can also become energy efficient. And there weren't too many educational programs available at that time, and I think none in India. So I signed up for a program in sustainable design at Carnegie Mellon. So I did my master's in sustainable architecture from Carnegie Mellon. Worked in the US for a couple of years.
And the work was all in
Happened
sustainable
to come
architecture.
back to India on a project which was actually revitalization. Yes, it was. I also did an internship actually in a place called Auroville, which is where a lot. So during my architect years, undergrad years, I went and lived there for a bit, which further sort of, it deepened my interest in the field. And so then I stayed in the US after my CMU degree. I stayed in the US. I worked with an architecture firm that was very focused on sustainability and affordable housing. I was part of the Green Building Council, which was at that time called the US Green Building Council. Now it is called GBCI. So I was very actively participating in a lot of US GBC events. I was also responsible for maintaining the organization's green building library. There was a lot of new material research that was happening in green buildings. It was still new even for the US. So sort of, we were an organization, we were a company that we were pathbreakers in trying to create affordable green homes because green buildings were always associated with extra cost. And what we were trying to do was we were trying to say, okay, no, you're just doing the right thing. And, if you do it the right way, there shouldn't be an additional cost. So, that was sort of the theory that we went with. I did that in the US for about 4.5, 5 years. At some point decided if this is what I want to do, I should do it for my country, and came back to India. And I joined a company in Bombay, which was again focusing on sustainable real estate projects. And this was everything from housing to commercial buildings. So it was an investment firm, but they were looking to invest into buildings that were sustainable in nature. And we had a partnership with a UK firm. So again, this was like setting up a completely new organization with some backing from the UK, with some rich transfer coming in from UK in terms of solar PV, all of those new technologies, but still contextualizing it to India and sort of bringing down the cost in a way that we could implement all of that here. So through all of that work, got exposed to a lot of gaps in the construction industry. And one of those biggest gaps was to do with skilled labor, skilled manpower to actually execute all of these things. Like, it's great to draw buildings, it's great to put everything on paper, and wonderful to have those good looking blueprints and 3D images, but you don't have skilled manpower to execute it. And from there began this idea of, can we do something to skill this manpower so that we can actually execute all this work. And of course, this was also 2010, 2011, which was the point where India's demographic dividend was being highlighted. So there was a lot of chatter around how India is sitting on this huge, capital of young folks who are not skilled, but India is the youngest country. And so there is all of this potential that lies in this country to be able to skill manpower and then therefore increase India's GDP. So I think a combination of all of that global chatter that was happening, plus this real-time on-ground gap that I saw, led me to start a company called Upskill, which basically focused on the skill training of underprivileged youth for employability skills. So which was hard skills that would be teaching maybe 8th, 9th, failed students also. Education was not a criteria. We could do short-term skill programs for them such that they would get jobs in the organized sector, right? We didn't want them.
Let go of the career in sustainable architecture
Yeah.
entirely, and you shifted to skilling.
Yes. Yes. So at that point, I let go of my architectural career and shifted to skilling. And that was a company that I started then. So my journey with Upskill was like a 9-year journey with Upskill. We did everything from starting up, literally on ground, starting a center in a village in Rajasthan, then another in Gujarat, raising capital from the Silicon Valley at some point in time to be able to grow that organization, doing a lot of work with the government, because in 2013, the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship was set up, and therefore a lot of regulation came in how you could run a skilling program. So I think that was a really beautiful learning journey. Somewhere down that line, I think a conversation with Byju's, who's my current employer, happened. And he said, can we do this at a bigger scale? You come in with a lot of exposure and experience of working in the rural geographies. And Byju's at that time was a company that was only focusing on the top 20, top 30% of the school-going children in private schools. And so we said, okay, here is, Byju's wants to expand, and the way for them to expand is actually to come down lower in the economic strata. And here am I, who understands the economic strata and could really benefit a lot of my own target segment with the products that Byju's has to offer. And therefore, we joined hands. So since 2020, I've been working with Byju's, and I have been working to create their rural business, essentially. So I head the vertical at Byju's that focuses on rural education.
Okay, so as we have this dialogue, then you're coming at this conversation from two perspectives, a little bit on sustainable architecture, because that's your core training and experience. And then the last many years, you've been working on the upskilling segment. So it will be great to get insights on both factions as you appropriate.
Sure. Actually, I think, Vibha, more than architecture now, I mean, I've sort of left architecture for the last 12 years. The two segments that I feel I can add a lot more value to are, number one, of course, EdTech, education in general, right? Where does the education industry heading? And the second is the development sector, because I've always worked at the confluence of education or skilling, but from a development sector lens.
Okay,
right. I think those would be the two areas of where I can add most value.
Yeah. Let's go with that. EdTech and development. That sounds great. Okay, so as we now funnel this conversation through the lens of EdTech and development, why is it important to even keep an eye on the future? As you sit in a decision-making authority, why have this conversation? Why even try to shape the narrative of future of work? Why is it important?
Right. So I think 3-4 key points, right? EdTech in general, and even the development sector, extremely fast evolving, fast changing. There's too much happening on a daily basis. And these are both problems at scale. So there are two ways to look at it. One is that there's too much happening. It's extremely volatile. Things are very fast moving, new technologies coming. So from a technology and a movement point of view, there's a lot of churn that's happening. On the other side, the problem or the scale is so big that whatever little change happens there impacts a lot of people. But I think from those 2 points of view, it's very important. And again, from 3 or 4 different perspectives. One is from the regulatory perspective, right? Education in India still is a state mandate, right? It is a regulated mandate that is coming from the center, that is coming to the state, and the state is responsible for at least all of the public education system. So any minor major change that happens at that level can really impact your business if you're in that business. So I think from the regulatory governance point of view, it is very critical to know what's perhaps coming. So, from the politics point of view, from anything that's happening on that front can really impact how you're going to be running your business. The second thing is, like I said, technology. With AI, the entire future of education seems to be right now a little bit of a confusion as to where we are going with it. How? So the first thing is, what are we teaching? The second thing is how we are teaching. And the third thing is who's teaching, right? All those three are right now going through a major change, because in terms of what we are teaching, the curriculum is constantly getting evolved, right? Whether it is basic subjects like, history, especially in a country like India, right? Right now, there have been so many textbook changes, there have been so many curricular changes that have happened. So those changes and what could they lead to in the future, then how are we teaching this? The pedagogy, there's so many pedagogical changes there. We went from being a completely offline model to being a hybrid model. So we've not seen that transition between offline to hybrid. We've seen offline online of what the school infrastructure is, what the teachers are equipped to do to handle all of that, right? And then the third thing, of course, is how we are teaching, right? So between what we are teaching, how we are teaching, and what is it that will ultimately lead to where the results, assessments, all of those things are also, there's a lot of change that's happening. Like the boards are now being abolished, right? So what is the new way in which students are going to be assessed, and how does that then add up to, say, merit-based hiring processes in the future? If you're going to do away with merit in some way and it's going to become all skill-based, then how does that translate into job opportunities, and how do people then look at hiring as a process? So I think all of those things are very important for employees, employers, anybody in the sector to constantly keep an eye on. And I think the third thing is, as an organization, I feel, what are the latest trends in our target segment? You wanted to say something?
No, I was just saying that what you're saying is absolutely on point because, you talked about how things are going to be taught, and there's obviously all this ja-
Yes.
thought about, oh, computers are going to take over the classrooms, the role
Yeah.
of the teacher will diminish significantly. So there's so much in India. There was all this, oh, we needed to upskill teachers, and there's all this teacher training programming going on. But if
Yeah.
we just like in India, we shift that, when the mobile phone phenomenon happened, India skip the first two
Shift. Yeah.
generations, right? And we went straight to
Yes.
3G. So
Yes.
it might
Yes.
happen similarly for teaching as well. We
Yes.
skip the initial because we didn't upskill enough teachers. Now we didn't
Absolutely.
skill the robots.
Absolutely. So I think you're absolutely right, Vibha, there that, I feel like, two big movements like that have happened. People who were completely non-tech savvy have completely skipped that desktop phase and moved to smartphones, right? There's a whole generational skip that happened. Even when we look at financial payments, right? People had hard cash transactions, completely skipped the internet banking generation and have now moved to UPI, right? I think the similar thing is going to happen in education, where everyone's used to this traditional classroom, very, very straightforward transactional teaching mode, where there's a teacher standing and there are the students sitting on one side, and there is exchange of conversation, exchange of information, and fairly one-sided. That has always happened, right? Several experiments have been done. Flipped classrooms have been experimented with, not still a very mass scale accepted way of teaching, but a lot of experimentation has been done with different formats of education. In India, you've seen this growing spate of IB schools, right? There are more and more IB schools coming up, where again, the classroom size, the teacher-student ratio, the digitization of the classroom, the quality of digitization of the classroom. Even when you're talking of hybrid, like the hybrid can have so many modes. Is this 20% tech and 80% teacher? It's very different from 20% teacher and 80% tech, right? But both hybrid. So I think there still needs to be a balance of or schools, teachers, everything needs to be contextualized to see what works where. Because also as a country, especially in India, we don't really have we've actually gone back 10 years in terms of foundational numeracy and literacy because of COVID. So, right. So at one point we talk of a highly digitized classroom, a lot of hybrid stuff happening, really cool AI, ML technology being used in digital education. And the other side, there are still students in grade 3 and grade 5 who can't do addition and subtraction.
Yeah.
Right.
So the
So there is
yeah.
the huge paradox. And I think what the future here that is, or what I am seeing in the near future is that this gap is getting wider and wider, right?
Okay,
Because there's not
we'll get
so
to
much
that.
that is being done here.
Let's
Yeah.
get to that
Okay.
question. So it seems
Okay.
like you've clearly illustrated it. You made a strong use case for why we need to know
Yes.
what's coming, because there's too much at stake, and the scale at which things are operating, especially in a country like India or other developing large economies, there's too much at
Yeah.
stake. Education lies
Yeah.
at the foundation of a country's economy, and with every
Yeah.
rapid change, the amplification effect is very large. Okay, so
Very
you've got a
large.
very strong use case for trying to understand the future. When you start looking at the future of work, you mentioned technology. What other factors, when we thought through factors, we've listed down some like globalization, flexible workspaces, geopolitical changes, socio-political, etc., DEI, diversity changes in the classroom, etc.
Yeah.
What are
Yeah.
you, if you want to talk about maybe two or three, and maybe give us some specific examples saying, look, these are the factors that are going to actually influence what's coming.
So I think one in India, especially, I think, or most developing countries, right? I think it's a geopolitical scenario that really determines what the changes are going to be. So I'll give you a very specific example, right? Like I said, in education is still very strongly governed by the state. Curriculum is defined by the center, NCRT, CBSE. These are the bodies that are the custodians of what the students learn. And then the implementation lies in the hand of the state. How the students learn depends on the state. Now different states are allowed to function in different ways. Someone says, I'll do only technology. Someone says, no, I'll only do, purely school-based. I will do teacher additional. So that's at that level. What are the geopolitical, who's in leadership? What are their thought process? How are they see? How does industry and policy decisions, right? The global perspective, what new? No, but like 2 years back, China decided to go and regulate the entire tech industry. But can you still hear me? Because your picture's frozen.
Yeah, you're pixelating at my end, and I couldn't hear you for the last 10 seconds.
Okay. Is this better? Let me change my position. 1 second.
Oh, it's the internet. It's your
Yeah.
sound went and came back.
I think this might be better.
Okay.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that in India, firstly, there are the national political, sort of players that play behind what's going to happen and how that's going to impact the future of this country, future of this industry, both, even the development sector. One, we're talking of education, but even in the development sector, we've all been reading in the news about more regulations coming in on CSR funding, on foreign direct investment into social development work in India. And that drastically changes what happens in the country. Even at a global scale, if you look at China, 2 years back, China decided to regulate the entire EdTech. Entire EdTech industry was regulated, and there was a price capping. Now, in India, the EdTech sector at that time was booming.
When you say they regulated it, did they just put like a ceiling on the?
Yeah, they put a cap on how much you can charge, right? So the market.
Wow.
Right.
Okay.
So the market forces didn't. So what we have in India is market forces are leading it, right? There are 10 competitors, and somebody's charging 20, somebody's charging 10. Whoever can afford to pay whatever they pay, right? So there's a premium that you pay for maybe a certain service, but it's not regulated by the government. It's still led by the market forces. But what that triggered in India, in terms of complete industry decision, was to say, okay, look, India needs a self-regulatory body for EdTech. right? So all the EdTech companies got together and created something like the Indian EdTech Consortium. And they said, okay, before the government decides to actually come and, regularize what we can earn from this, can we at least do a self-regulate? Yeah, exactly, right? So I think a lot of those geopolitical changes that are not just happening in India, but are also happening overseas will greatly impact how business is done and run in India. So that is one. I think the second thing in terms of diversity and inclusion, I'd like to point out, it's a common thing between both the industries that I sort of, have worked in, whether it is development or education, is that I've seen quite the reverse. I mean, as a company, Byju's, we have far more women than we have men because we are in the job of teaching, right? Even in the development sector, you will find 70% women and 30% men, right? So in that sense, I mean, I'm actually looking forward to quite the reverse happening. I am looking forward to far more men participating in the development sector roles. And I mean, why that is so, I guess, because development sector has always been looked upon as, you need to have compassion, you need to have, it's like a softer job that's
Salaries are not
always
there.
reversed.
For the men, it's as simple as
Yeah, so there's two factors. One is the salary is a problem. And again, right, that raises questions about why should women then choose lower salaries? Like, so there's that whole other sort of gender, parity of salaries question that gets raised. And the second is also, I think, the soft skills that are required for the development sector and education sectors are always more feminine in nature, right? And which is why I have actually never seen the problem of women not being included in the labor force in these two sectors. It's quite the contrary. So even when I hire, um, naturally I get more resumes, more interest from women. I to actually cap that, and I have to actually go back and say, I need these men. So when I'm looking at D&I in my company, it's the reverse story for me. I'm actually trying to prioritize for men to come and participate in the sector. So I think going forward, I feel. Yeah, so I think two things are happening, Vibha. Firstly, I think job parity is happening now, and the pay parity is now happening. And there are two reasons for that. That even development sector, because of technology, because of there's a lot of intervention. So your standard job roles, like even if you're working in say education and development sector, it's not like you have to, everybody will have to go to a village and live there and teach children. No, there is somebody who's sitting at the back end and doing business analytics. So there are some very hard skills that are still required in the development sector, right? Even the development sector is evolving to accommodate or to want to or create roles that are standard roles. You will have the same business analytics person who can work in the financial sector. His skills are very much needed in the development sector also. Somebody who's developing an app, a fintech app, or a banking app will be the same skills even in the development sector to develop that app. So I think what's happening is, number one, there is a lot of common skills and common job roles that are now being created because of the evolution of these two sectors themselves, which means that we will see a lot more people coming in who are non-development sector people, right? Who are regular folks coming in your regular mainstream industries, but are still working in the development sector. So that is one thing that I see happening. And the second thing I see happening because of that, there'll also be pay parity. Because if a business, if a business analyst is coming in from, say, a financial sector, he's going to expect the same sort of salary, whether he comes to a foundation, right? So I think there's some pay parity. There's a little bit of a distance to be traveled there in terms of mindset change. But at some point, I think that's what's going to happen. Right now, I think the pay gap is at least 30 to 40% for the same role, for the same numbers of years of experience. There's a 30 to 40% pay gap. I think that pay gap is going to come down to maybe 10 to 15% in the next decade.
Wow. Okay. So I'm seeing a lot of optimism, and I'm hoping that your vision of the future actually comes through, because reducing pay parity and getting people from fintech and other hot sectors to come to work in development would make for an ideal world, so to speak. So let's hope that happens. It's interesting when I interviewed somebody from the AI space, when he spoke about, in terms of diversity, he said it's no longer going to be a conversation about men and women or different genders and different sexual preferences. Diversity is going to accommodate for machines. So you're going to
That's true.
about diversity,
Yeah.
saying, oh, how do we now think about diversity with another faction in the room? That changes the lens, and it's going to
True.
happen in EdTech, right? For
That
sure, it's going to be largely machine led.
it is. Yeah. So I was just, that was probably going to be my next thing, that, I think there is a big question about, we as a country are looking to be the supplier of teachers to the world. We've always been the educators of the world, right? Always have been. Even now, I think most countries look for Indian tutors
Huh, huh.
wherever you may be sitting and,
Correct.
learning. I think Indian tutors in, I think uh, we are at one point, till at least say last year, everyone was really looking at India being the supplier of in AI comment teaching. Uh, in within a year, I've seen that big switch amongst industry leaders. That conversation has somehow become closer to what you just mentioned about, yes, we still need to supply teachers, but are these human teachers?
Hmm.
So I think that's the question now, that yes, we still want to be the teachers, we still have to supply the teachers, there still need to be teachers, but what teachers in?
What happens then, Mansi, if robots take over the teaching? Of course, they won't entirely take over, right? You talked about that 80-20 rule. It might shift from 80% human to now 80% robot and 20% supplemented. What
Yeah,
happens to the
yeah.
entire population of teachers that we as a country have been so focused on nurturing and developing? Are they going to just be left unemployed? What's going to happen?
So again, Vibha, I think the country, the dichotomy is huge. One side, like I said, India's children are privileged metro tier one, tier two cities. 70% of Indians are still living, right? They're still living in places where there is no electricity, in place where there is one
I think
teacher
70% of India is still rural,
of
right? They're
five.
still living. I'm losing you here.
Yes, yes. So 70% of India's children are still studying in school system. They're
Hmm.
in an, hello? Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but your visual is fully blurred right now. Okay, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I feel like, so yes, robots can take over, everything can happen, but it'll still be a small segment of the society that'll be impacted by it, right? Simply because all of this also comes at a cost, right? Right now, we are talking of schools. A lot of these children that I'm talking of, if you look at the income pyramid of India, right? Um, 70% of the Indian population is living under a 5 lakh rupee per annum household income. Okay. That means what they can afford. A lot of these children go to free schools, that are public schools, that are, free of charge. Some of them go subsidized schools, highly subsidized, where their school fees is anywhere between 200 rupees to say 1,000 rupees per year. These are schools that can't afford any of this, Vibha. Forget about digitization. I'm telling you, most of the schools we work with at Byju's, we work with over 5.5 million children coming from the underprivileged backgrounds. And these 5.5 million children had no way of learning during COVID. They had no mobile phone, they had no electricity. There have been cases where, even though we a device, we've had to take their devices from village to the next village to charge them overnight and bring them back so that they can attend school next day, because there is no electricity, right?
Hmm.
So I think that divide in India is so huge. Intervention, all of that, in terms of the actual implementation or on ground work or the physical manifestation of that, I think I think we have a long way to go. But in terms of curricular changes, in terms of that standardization of curricular and assessment, and how does AI ML, change that for us? That is where I think technology will play a huge role. Teacher training, I think technology will play a huge role, because whoever is teaching here still needs training. They still need upskilling themselves. There's a huge gap in that teacher training well. So I think in the case of, this balance 70% of India that needs to improve the education standards, there lies a scope in where there are no teachers. Like we work with schools, but there are no teachers. There is one person. He's the principal, he's the vice principal, he's the science teacher, math teacher, social science teacher. He's everything. And he handles grade 1 to 5. Okay. So in such a case, if there's a robotic teacher, great. I'm looking forward to it. Right? I want the technological intervention there so that these children have somebody, they have a teacher. They don't have a teacher right now. So while we a lot of teachers in India, I don't exactly remember those numbers and I probably send those. There is a big
The supply gap is
we
still
need
large
so
enough.
many teachers in
Okay.
supply gap is still very large. Is very large. Yeah.
Okay. Supply
So I
gap is
think two things will
large.
need to happen. One is, yeah, so the supply gap will somewhere get replenished because of this whole digitization of teaching, hopefully. And the second thing that will happen is that the existing teachers will have to upskill themselves and really raise their standards to be able to, keep up with a lot of this technological intervention that's going to come. And that needs to happen sooner than. So there needs to be a very focused, targeted 1 year, 2 year, 5 year plan as a country that we need to upskill these teachers.
Okay. And as you had said right at the start, a lot of this, especially in the development and rural spaces, predicated basis the government and the government policies. If the
Yes,
government
it is.
decides one day saying, okay, all public schools will now have one digitized automated machine, and that machine is going to do all this,
Yes.
and it changes the landscape completely.
Changes. And that's already happened. Very progressive states that we are seeing. We've seen very, very drastic changes over the last 2 years. I won't name the states, or maybe I can. Like, for example, Andhra Pradesh decided last year that we are going to digitize everything. All our students are going to study from a digital platform. We will put in a 10,000 crore rupee budget. We will digitize every school and we will make this happen. So for the last 1.5, 2 years, immense teacher training programs, every student in that, right? So that's where the private bodies like ours are involved in actually helping them do that knowledge transfer. We are knowledge partners. We are giving them that content. Then there are, so I think, like you said, it is a prerogative of the state to do that. Some states are more progressive, technologically adept to actually even handle it, right? Some are still sort of, slowly catching. So that of digitization.
Okay.
Until then, it's going to be a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Your voice is fluctuating a bit, but I've understood. You're saying it's going to be state-led and policy-led. Yeah. Your voice is fluctuating a bit, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Give me a second. Give me a second. Let me change my network. Give me a second. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, much clearer. The voice is clearer.
Better?
Yeah, the voice is clearer. The visual is still a bit hazy.
Still bad. I don't know what it is. Yeah, network in my office can be a little bit of a challenge.
Okay, no problem. All right.
Yeah.
Speaking of offices, let's transition to our next question about workspaces. So as I'm speaking to different people, I'm getting contradictory opinions. Some people say, look, this whole work from home thing is a little bit of a overinflated perception. We don't think this is going to sustain, blah, blah, blah. Then I speak to younger startups. The younger guys, the startup guys are like, oh, of course, we all work from home. We love it. And so there is this dichotomy of thought. Where are you in this dichotomy?
So I think we've all done both, right? We've all done this whole work from home thing, and then we've all gone back to offices, some forcefully, some voluntarily. So I think I sit on the fence, to be very honest. I like the flexibility of working from home, and very honestly, being somebody who's a parent, who's managing the child's schedule, managing a household.
More futuristic perspective, like 15 years later, what do you see the world as?
Yeah. So I think it's going to remain to be like this, right? I think people, so like there are visual learners and there are auditory learners and there are different types of learners that we identify in the whole education spectrum. I think there are different types of workers also, right? Some people work best in a collaborative. Some roles require them to be working in a more collaborative manner. Some roles require people and some personalities require to work in peace and quiet at their own pace. And that's always going to exist, these different personalities in a workspace. So I think there is always going to be, even in the future, there is going to be this mix of people, those who like to come into work and those who want to socialize, and they don't mind spending 10 hours in office, 4 hours chatting away, but then, 6 hours working hard. And that's how they work effectively. And then there are those people, those people who are going to say, okay, I'll just work for 4 hours. There's no point in me spending, time in the traffic jam, and I'll just sit at home and get this done in 4 hours. So I think both of those will coexist. And that's what is interesting, that I think more than an organization wise, this is going to become a team, sort of decision. Right. So
Okay.
if companies are flexible with that, if companies are flexible in saying that, okay, this is not a company-wide policy, this works for you, this works for me. As long as, your team leaders, as long as your, vertical heads, or however they're going to sort of, create those modules. I think because companies are huge, right? There are lots of large companies. I don't think company-wide policies will
Okay.
continue to exist because they don't apply to everyone.
You're
So I
saying
think
it
it's going
can
to become a lot more modular. Yeah.
decentralized down to the team level. And what
Yes.
was interesting is you said it'll be personality type led and
Yeah.
job type led. Okay. You're
Yes.
not seeing any
Yes.
sweeping like, oh, with all these
I
machines.
don't see that. I don't see that. I mean, we talk about it, and everybody talks about this utopian theory of, what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But I mean, even in education, if you see what's happened, we're still all vying for marks.
Yeah.
I think when you and I were in school, it was like, nahi, marks will go away and this will
Yeah.
happen and there'll be no competition. What is it? Still the same, no?
It's
So
even
none
more
of these
competitive
changes, yeah,
now.
even more. So I don't think any of these large systemic changes happen very quickly. People are people. They like to work in a certain way. People are people, they need to be taught. They are social animals,
The
so
workspace
they
is
need
here
to
to
see each
stay.
other. Yeah,
Okay.
I think so. I think so. Yeah.
You're not saying that this workspace is going to eradicate out of our
I
system.
don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, it's going to become more flexible, I think, more and more flexible. Yeah.
Okay, so workspaces are here to stay. You're saying they'll become more flexible. There will be an infusion of technology. That's no one can deny that. What sort of skills are you seeing? If you have a child of your own, or if you were talking to the next generation, what
Yeah.
sort of skills, both hard and soft, would you say?
Yeah.
Like, as if I wanted to go back and I was like 12 years old now, this is what I
Yeah.
would focus on, having this foresight and
Yeah.
hindsight.
Yeah, very, very tough because things are changing every day. But that said, I think on the soft skills side things, I mean, it's very easy to say, like, agility, adaptability, because that's the one thing you can do. If whatever's changing, I've changed my career thrice, Vibha. I've been an architect, then I've been an entrepreneur in the development sector, social entrepreneur. Now I'm a hardcore sort of business person in
You're
an
already
EdTech.
a woman of the future.
So I have, so and there are many times when I go back and think, like, what's that common theme? Like, is there anything common in how I've led my 20 years of professional life? And I think the one thing that's going to become, at least in the soft skill, is going to be purpose. People are going to people are going to be far more purpose driven than they have been. Right. And I think I see that a lot happening in the younger generation. For us, I think there was a lot of fear. We all grew up in a time where our parents saw scarcity,
Mm.
right? Our generation, even the generation after us, has grown up in a time where you have to work, you have to get a job, you have to make so much money, you have to save, because otherwise there is scarcity, right? So we all grew up in that time period, or at least were influenced highly by that mindset.
Yeah.
The generation now is not influenced by that mindset, right? A large part of that generation, you see the rise in consumerism, you see a rise in people taking away the spend that they do on sort of luxury items, lifestyle choices that they make. So I feel that's also going to start reflecting in how they choose their careers and professions, right?
Okay.
We hire a lot of young folks, and for them their career is not something like, a lot of us stayed in jobs for 15 years, 20 years. Once you joined a company, you stayed, right?
Yeah.
That's not the case. People are switching between jobs, people are jumping across. So I think the one thing that's going to become far more important is going to be purpose. What is it that drives you? What are you in it for?
In terms of
Say,
skilling, what kind of skills would you
yeah.
require?
So I think in terms of soft skills, adaptability, and sort of, just willing to learn and defining what your purpose is and knowing why you're doing this is going to be important. In terms of hard skills, I still think that it is going to be like analytics, right? Whether it is business analytics, whether it's financial analytics, because data there's a lot of data. That data is being provided. AI is there to sort of cull that out for you and, give you all of that in these beautiful looking charts and everything. But somebody still has to make sense of it and put it to use. So I do think that in the future, everything in tech, whether it is data analytics, whether it is business analytics coming from understanding that tech, whether it is just technology analysis using AI tools. So I think a lot of that is going to be in terms of hard skills. The other hard skill, which I think is quite underrated, is just comms, right? Communication.
Hmm.
So why I say that is, again, because see, if businesses are going to continue to exist the way are, I think there is still a lot of gap in how people have started to value communications a lot more, right? Identities of companies, what they stand for, what they do is becoming very important. Earlier, it didn't matter what, there are a few brands. We all know a few brands. Not everybody wants to be a brand. Everybody wants to tell a story. Everybody wants, there's a whole, hoopla about what is it that you do. So I think that communication still is something that in the creative side, I think communications is going to be still a very important hard skill to have. And on the technical side, I think just any sort of analytics
But
job
even
role
if I want to be a teacher, even if I say, hey, I want to go teach English and math, primary school, do you think I still need to know some amount of tech and data?
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll tell you, right? You need to know tech and data, because at least that much where you are able to use an ERP or a CRM on which your content is coming, right? At least that much of tech enablement you need. The second thing is that most teachers are also expected to contribute to curriculum design, right?
Hmm.
It's not just as simple as, okay, here's a curriculum handed over to you. So both in terms of your daily operations, you are going to be completely tech enabled. Therefore, you need to be comfortable with tech. And
Hmm.
in terms of your career progression, you're going to be expected to use tech tools to
Hmm.
advance your career. And I think for both those reasons, you need a certain level of tech savviness to come in.
Hmm.
So in the last 6 months, I have actually taken a lot of AI courses and have upskilled myself,
Hmm.
because just to stay abreast as to what's happening in the industry.
Okay.
Assessments are all tech enabled now, right? AI based. So when teachers are assessing, if
Hmm.
they are not familiar with AI tools, and AI tools are also learning along the way. So the teachers need to actually understand a little bit more in depth to use those tools effectively. So for in the teaching space, I feel understanding digital technology, AI, ML, how those things are playing a role in the back end,
Hmm. Okay.
analyzing all of that is very, very important.
Okay.
Very
So you no longer can escape, get your B.Ed saying, look, I just want to teach Montessori, I want to just teach English, whatever. You're saying technology is here to stay and you
Yes,
better get
absolutely.
to it.
I think technology is going to take over a lot of the operational admin side of education, and therefore anybody who's in that ecosystem will have to
We'll
stay
have to.
abreast of that. Yeah,
Okay, great. Okay. And you mentioned communication. Is it interesting? Communication is going to be twofold, right? One is being able to talk to your machine and
yeah,
then be able to talk to humans. So we're going to have to
yes,
now potentially start
yes,
training courses on this is how you speak to a machine, this is how you speak to human beings.
exactly,
And that
exactly.
because if you see the young kids now, they're so adept at speaking to machines. Put them
Yes,
in front of a room full of people and they're a little bit awkward, whatever. But with machines, they're
correct.
so quick, you know,
Absolutely. I mean,
agentic.
even if you think now, AI, your ability to use AI, any tool, whichever tool, whether it's an image editing tool or it's like writing an essay tool, depends on the prompt you give it,
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
right?
So
And
how
that prompt is just pure communication. That's pure comms. How articulate you are there. So whether it is as simple as that to somebody designing the brand comms
okay.
for large
So
organization,
two things. You said technology and communication.
communication.
So now, if you identified these two things, how do you think organizations, educators, and the government at large, especially in a sector like yours, what should they be doing? If you were going to advise, let's say the education ministry and all the other ministries at the top level saying, guys, if you're going to prep this country for the future, here are like my top three policy recommendations.
So I think the first thing on the tech side is going to be, as a country, we still don't have a tech roadmap. I mean, again, right? I'm speaking as some, but yes, I do think that as a country, we still don't have an ethical. So here, ethics also plays a very big role, right? Because when there's a white space and there are gray lines, so I think for the first thing is to actually have a charter,
Hmm.
and I can speak for EdTech. right? Technology for everything else also matters. But I think the first thing is to actually have a chat of what do we stand for? Where do the ethical standards come in? Where do we draw the line? These are all of the gray areas, but where do we stand on this?
Policy, ethics,
So I
ethical.
think the first thing is an ethic, is a policy, a charter on ethics. That is a country we need to define. There's just children's rights that need to be protected. There's children's safety that needs to be protected. So I think the first thing is really digging down and defining a lot of those things and creating a charter in terms of a policy that then becomes a national policy. Okay. The second thing is, I think, again, on terms of technology adoption, right? What's the level of technology adoption we are doing? Because we're still talking about the 70% children who are not at all touched by a private education sector, private
Hmm.
education system. So those 70% of the students still need to know, or still then there needs to be a standard, a minimum standard that needs to be defined to say, okay, this much technology intervention, or this is what a hybrid classroom looks like. This is the module of a hybrid classroom. These are the 3 or 4 archetypes that exist. This works best in this scenario. This works best in this scenario. You can adopt any one of these. That standardization is hugely lacking, right? So in terms of just infrastructure and tech adoption is the next sort of like a playbook that we need, which doesn't exist. And the third thing is on the teacher training. So creating maybe like a sandbox, or creating again something on just upskilling of teachers. So yes, there are many teacher training programs that exist, but if you look at the level and quality of those teacher training programs, right, I think it is very subpar. It still is very subpar, and it is not in line with the technological advancements. It is still about what is the best way to teach Pythagoras theorem, and
Ah,
that
so
doesn't talk about
that's
technology,
okay.
right? Yeah.
So
So
outdated
digital,
teachers
yeah.
training.
How do you integrate the digital transformation into teacher training programs? I think is a still big wide gap.
And of course,
So
curriculum development, right? To
yeah.
transform curriculum
Yeah,
to
so that again, right, that is an NCRT, CBSE sort of a prerogative. So I think in terms of a national policy, I would definitely say on the ethical gray lines, what do you do in terms of policy? Because you're looking at children, you're looking at their rights, you're looking at their responsibilities. The second thing is just overall tech benchmarks need to be set when digitizing infrastructure. And the third thing is this whole digital teaching playbook for teachers of the future.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. That's very helpful, and hopefully this video will come across to them and they'll pick up on some of
Fingers
this. So,
crossed.
as
Yes.
you are seeing this landscape evolve, if you were to just fathom a futuristic world, what careers do you think will just become redundant? And you say, hey, these careers are not going to exist. Children of the next
Mm,
generation won't even know these careers existed earlier. And what are the new
mm.
careers you see evolving or coming up? So saying, hey, this is a new career category that we didn't even hear about.
Wow, that's a tough one. And I've been thinking about it. I don't have answers, but I think everything that requires a physical human skill. I think in the future, I see a lot of sports persons coming up, right? I see a lot more. I just see that industry. If you ask me today, the most promising industry, at least for the next decade or two, is sports,
Hmm.
because it is meant for humans. Robots cannot take that over, right? So it's a physical. It's based on the physical
They
human
will
form.
start leagues for robots. They will be the
So they
whole
can.
human thing. They'll have a robotic Olympics.
Yes,
Whoever
yes,
does that
absolutely. They
fastest,
can. They
you know.
can, right? They can do that. But
At Carnegie Mellon, they had that. Remember, they had the buggy races at Carnegie.
exactly,
So,
exactly. But I
and
think
that,
that will still be entertainment, right? I think even in the other sense, humans till humans continue to exist, I think there's going to be a lot more focus on their physical form than their mental form. It's much easier to take over the mental form than it is to take over the physical form. So I feel like a very, very large industry, and again, I'm not talking of the need in terms of, I can see, like, if you look at India and rural India, then healthcare and education are two big areas where I think a lot of work needs to be done. And I can talk a lot about healthcare and what are the gaps that I see. So if I'm looking at that sort of a segment, if I'm looking at the social sector, then healthcare and education are two big areas where there'll constantly be work that's needed,
hmm.
right? But if I'm looking at sort of the global scenario, then I feel like human form, sports, like that's just going to be an industry which is going to be in a very
Any
important.
jobs around you that will just go away, like jobs you've been
Um,
seeing?
so I do think, like, a lot of the very operational jobs, like, content writing. It seems like the first one that's already people are starting to face the brunt in the content writing side, because that's the most easily done, so graphic designing, content writing, all of these sorts of jobs I feel are the first ones that are going to go away. And a lot of data, I would not say analytics, but uh, you know people, so not business analytics but data analytics, right?
Mm.
People who are just sitting and creating, crunching numbers, I think a lot of those jobs will also go away. So anything that AI can take over easily will be the first ones to go, and we're already seeing that happening.
Mm.
Teaching, I think there's still a long way to
It'll
go.
be interesting if the balance shifts and the farmers now come to the top of the pyramid, because farming work is physical labor, and
Yes,
you might just see the hierarchy shift and say, oh, now farmers are in hot demand because
very, very possible. Very
yeah.
possible. So I do feel like all the physically demanding jobs, which the industrial revolution sort of impacted at that time, yeah,
Mm.
a lot of that is going to come back. And a lot of the sort of, the technological revolution that drove that is possibly going to
Seeing a
slow
reversal
down.
there.
I think we'll see a bit of a reversal there. It'll be very interesting to see where this goes.
Okay, so as we closing off, generally, if you were going to, put your pound of flesh on one side of a weighing scale, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future? You generally think, like, basis everything we've spoken about, it's going to be a beautiful world that our children are going to inhabit.
Mm.
Or are you seeing some threats and challenges, and what would you identify as the
No.
optimistic bucket and the threats? And
Right. I mean, I'm an eternal optimist. That's what I like to call myself. So I'm very optimistic. And I mean, I see good things happening in the future, right? I see technology being put to good use. I've already seen in case of EdTech, where during COVID, none of these children could have studied, but EdTech made that happen. So I am very, very positive about the future, both in terms of, even with all of these technological advancements and everything. But at the same time, it's funny that, yesterday I was talking to my 10-year-old, and whether it was history, whether it was geography, the only thing we'll end up discussing was war. And why
mm,
do humans hate each other so much?
mm,
Right. So I think we're also currently, even after all of this, we are still living in times where we are warring, right?
mm,
So, so I think some of those things make me feel very, very pessimistic at times. But if you ask me like a general overall scenario, I think I'm very optimistic about the future. I feel like, there will be, of course, a lot of focus on bringing in the ethical standards of AI, because that's a big piece that is still missing. Uh, if we are able to fix that, if we are able to define that, if everybody is able to come on board with what is right and how much do we use this AI, what kind of intervention do we allow it to make into our lives, because how much we allow it to impact us is in our hands, right? So if there is some sort of ethical benchmarking that is done in the intervention of AI at our workplace, in our homes, uh, I think if that is taken, that's my biggest fear. If that is taken care of, I think the future is very bright, both in terms of opportunities for young people, and in terms of,
and all this work you've been doing in upskilling the last 10, 12 years, do
yeah.
you see that in the future saying, hey, look, these robots are going to come in, ML is going to come in, and a large part of my work I'll actually see come to fruition thanks to machines? Or you don't really see that changing?
No, I don't see that changing, Vibha. I think
Ah,
we
you
have a
don't see
lot.
that changing,
I
really?
don't see that changing much. See, I'm telling you, right? I mean, these are people who still don't have food to eat. Yeah. I mean, like we're still
Oh.
talking of. So there's a what we read in this world that I'm exposed to because of social media, and then there is a completely different world that I'm seeing every day when I go to work.
Yeah, but you
Uh,
talk to the AI experts, obviously they like to position this grandiose version of
I
AI, and
know.
it's, all healthcare will be eradicated because, now you'll have this machine doctor, and in rural areas now a machine will be able to detect your diabetes and your whatever, and like there's all this
No,
eye
I mean, I think all of that will happen. I think all of that will happen, and it's great if that happens, right? I mean, that's the part I'm optimistic about. That it'll be very great. But that's what I'm saying. That right now, at least in a developing country like India, the gap is so big
Hmm.
that as long as that gap is used to fill, it's robots cannot, or AML cannot replace that, because there's nothing to replace. It's not
Hmm.
like there are enough humans and then they will be replaced. The need is huge. There is only 10% of that need that is being met. So if all of this technology can come and overtake that 90%, I'm very happy with that.
Hmm.
So I think
Because
it's
you're
a
just saying the
question of,
gap is so
the gap
large,
is
the
so
problem
huge.
is so big.
Yes. So whether it's in healthcare or it's in education, at least these two large sectors,
Hmm.
the gap is still very huge. And at multiple levels, it is very huge. In multiple roles, it is very huge. So by the time technology will come and fill those gaps, there's still room for all of us to coexist, humans and technology to coexist, to fulfill that gap.
Okay. Okay. Well, hopefully it'll accelerate the rate of change.
I think it will.
Some
I
amount
think
of
it will accelerate the rate of change, which is why the humans that exist there who are currently doing that role will need to constantly upskill themselves, right? Because they're not used to that pace of growth and acceleration and advancement. So if they need to coexist, they need to keep up with the pace. That's what's, so I think besides all of the kids that are coming in and are looking at new jobs, I think there's a large focus that needs to be on upskilling. If you don't want to be redundant, you need to be upskilled.
Okay, and so skill identification and then providing that skill set. As
Yes.
we talked about, right? Just skipping a generation of perhaps laptop literacy and then just shifting
Yes.
directly to
Yeah,
whatever the future
exactly.
holds.
Yes. So
Okay, so
I think that is what is needed.
that is a
Yeah.
largely policy led then. If you're looking at India as a country as a whole, it's boiling down to the government getting these things right.
So I think a lot of it is policy led. In many cases, I've also seen this being industry led. Right.
Okay.
If the industry is strong enough and there's a very strong use case, policy will automatically follow. So it's not started because of a policy. It started by the industry. It started because of a ground level need, and then it turns into a policy. And that's what happened to EdTech. The government didn't start EdTech. EdTech was a completely private led movement, purely from a business commercial perspective, brought in competitors. And now the government policy changes are happening. The entire new education policy that has come up has a lot of EdTech.
Okay, so you're saying it was led by organizations and then the
Yes,
government picked up on
yes,
it. Okay,
yes.
then the onus lies on organizations such as yours
Yes,
to
yes.
take
So I
the
think the onus
lead
lies on large industry players to come up with solutions, but then also inform policy decisions with the right
parallelly.
mindset. Yeah,
Correct. Okay, good.
yeah.
So it's a good balance, and let's hope that that balance remains. Thank you, Mansi. This is invaluable. I'm just amazed, and my head is buzzing with thoughts and ideas.
Good.
Fantastic conversation, and you have tremendous insight. Even though this was only 12 years, I wonder what would have happened if you had 20 years in tech. You would have had a whole, you
No, I'm
know,
very happy to be talking to you, Vibha.
thank
So
you. Thank you
yeah,
so much.
thank
Fantastic.
you.
And I will definitely keep you posted on the progress with the book. Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you so much and
Great.
look forward to
Bye.
connecting.
Look forward to talking to you. Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.